So a couple of months back, I made a video on the best World War II movies ever. And you guys listed tons of movies in the comments that I couldn't include because that video would have ended up like 2 hours long. So I figured, why not just make a follow-up? These are the 20 best World War II movies according to you, my commenters. And honestly, some of your suggestions and insights are genuinely great. This one's about British Royal Navy sailors during the Battle of the Atlantic, hunting submarines and escorting convoys. It's based on Nicholas Montserrat's novel, and people praise this movie like crazy for how real it feels. Actual World War II historian James Holland even called it flawless in historical accuracy. Real veterans acted in this movie, real wartime ships were used. Holland literally said, "Everything's absolutely spot on," and called it the most realistic war film he'd ever seen. The movie's gritty portrayal of the relentless tension and exhaustion at sea is exactly why it was such a huge hit in Britain. Here's how one of my commenters put it: "The cruel sea, most realistic depiction of the War of the Atlantic. Often forgotten but never surpassed. No surprise it's still got a perfect 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. People call it one of the best naval war films ever." This Japanese film is just brutal. You've got a soldier named Tamura stranded with his unit in the Philippines toward the end of the war. Supplies run out, soldiers lose their minds, some even turn to cannibalism. Tamura, who's sick with tuberculosis, abandons his group and tries to survive on his own. Now here's something crazy. The director wanted maximum realism, so he barely let actors eat, brush their teeth, or cut their nails. Nurses were always nearby to make sure no one got seriously ill. But the lead actor went even further. He willingly starved himself without telling anyone until he literally collapsed. Production had to shut down for 2 weeks. Critics gave it 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. One commenter summed it up perfectly: one of the most gut-wrenching World War II sagas of all time, monumentally grim and nihilistic. This one still haunts me 15 years later. It's one of the most harrowing war films ever. Some viewers even called it the most savage film in history. And honestly, they're probably right. One of my commenters nailed it by saying the best war films are German war films. They don't glorify or change history. And perhaps one of the truly great German films about war is The Bridge. Near the end of the war, 7 teenage boys get pulled right out of school and sent to defend a small bridge against the Americans. They get zero training, no instructions. Their commanding officer literally gets mistaken for a deserter and arrested before he can tell them what to do. It's based on author Manfred Gregor's own experiences as a child during the war, so it's seriously powerful stuff. The battle scenes are shockingly graphic. People think Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory was intense, but this movie goes even further. The boys are basically slaughtered one by confused American soldiers, and the pointless tragedy of the whole situation leaves you angry, disgusted, just totally frustrated that this ever happened. Sam Peckinpah, the guy behind The Wild Bunch, made only one war movie, but it's brutal. James Coburn stars as a German soldier on the Eastern Front, just desperately trying to keep himself and his platoon alive. Meanwhile, his commanding officer is only interested in earning medals he doesn't deserve. Orson Welles himself even praised this one, said it was the best war movie he'd seen since All Quiet on the Western Front because it shows the war clearly through ordinary soldiers' eyes. And you guys had some seriously strong opinions about this one. Cross of Iron is my all-time favorite movie. Realistic action, great cast, and a story of soldiers, German, just trying to stay alive for each other, and an officer standing in their way who just wants his cross of iron. Honestly, pretty hard to argue with that. This movie covers the famous aerial battles between the British Royal Air Force and Germany's Luftwaffe during the Blitz of 1940. Huge cast here: Laurence Olivier, Michael Caine, Christopher Plummer, Robert Shaw, all playing key historical figures, directed by Guy Hamilton. It was based on the book The Narrow Margin, and it seriously tried to stick close to reality. The flying scenes are especially incredible. Way ahead of its time. Super expensive, huge scale, the type of thing you just don't see much anymore because it'd cost way too much today. One of you guys put it really well in the comments. The Battle of Britain is so strong because it is an amazingly accurate retelling of the Blitz of London and the struggle to survive. And that accuracy is exactly why this film holds up so well today. Here's another World War II film that still got a perfect Rotten Tomatoes score, actually made right in the middle of the war itself. Literally, it was released in the UK on D-Day, June 6, 1944. It's about a group of British civilians drafted into the army, trained, and then shipped off to North Africa to fight Rommel's Afrika Korps. For a British movie from 1944, the production quality is surprisingly great. Real buildings blowing up, really impressive sea battle effects. David Niven stars as a lieutenant, and at the time he was actually serving as a British Army major himself, fighting in the war. Now, some people might see this as a bit cliché, but you gotta remember when it was made. The backstory on the script was pretty interesting. Eric Ambler and Peter Ustinov were commissioned to write a script that would encourage enlistment in the infantry and were obliged to show skepticism, give way to admiration. One of my viewers compared it alongside another wartime classic, The Way Ahead and Went the Day Well, both made during World War II, are classics of British war cinema. None of them feature great pyrotechnics, but they portray the personal level of war. Probably the best Battle of the Bulge movie ever made. This was Hollywood's first big studio combat film after the war, and its success basically rebooted the entire genre. Steven Spielberg himself called this one out specifically as a major influence. He said the World War II pictures that inspired me the most were William Wellman's Battleground, Sam Fuller's The Steel Helmet, and Don Siegel's Hell is for Heroes. I didn't really draw from those films aesthetically, but they made a big impression on me. Battleground starred actual veterans, including James Arness, who was the most decorated actor in the cast. The screenwriter, Robert Pyrosh, actually fought in the Battle of the Bulge himself as a master sergeant, and he hired 20 veterans from the 101st Airborne to train the actors and even appear as extras. One of my viewers summed it up nicely. Battleground is the best depiction of what it's like to be in an infantry platoon. This is probably the most authentic depiction of the Battle of Stalingrad I've ever seen on film. Stalingrad was brutal. Over 1 million people died. The filmmakers totally nailed that feeling of desperation, just day after day of complete horror. Unlike typical Hollywood movies, there's no forced romance, no dramatic heroism, and no ideological speeches about Nazis or communists. Just 4 regular German soldiers sent into the battle, desperately trying to survive and escape. The Germans here aren't cartoon villains. They're shown as normal guys trapped in a horrific situation. Unlike Enemy at the Gates, the filmmakers here didn't try to put some sappy love story or dress up factual occurrences of the battle. This film may be fiction, but it conveys what happened in the bloodiest battle in World War II, and that's exactly why this movie still holds up. Classic submarine movie with Clark Gable and Burt Lancaster. Gable plays a U.S. sub-commander totally obsessed with sinking a specific Japanese ship, clashing constantly with his first officer, played by Lancaster. Now, there was some criticism because both leads were way too old compared to actual wartime submarine commanders. Gable was 56, Lancaster 44, and real sub-commanders were usually early 30s at most. But none of that really matters. The tension and drama are fantastic. Sure, special effects today look dated, but the performances and the sense of realism completely hold up. One viewer said, "Run silent, run deep, Clark Gable and Burt Lancaster. Still the greatest sub-movie, a favorite genre of mine." And honestly, I think they're right. Until Das Boot came out almost 30 years later, nothing else really came close. This movie basically defined the whole modern action genre. Plot's simple. Team of Allied saboteurs sneaks onto this heavily defended Nazi-held Greek island to blow up massive guns blocking the rescue of 2,000 trapped British soldiers. Behind the scenes was complete chaos. Gregory Peck openly hated the script. David Niven couldn't stand the director. Anthony Quinn literally rewrote parts of his role mid-shoot. Production dragged on forever in Greece. Niven actually felt totally miscast at first, too old for his corporal role, but later said he considered it one of his best performances ever. Despite all that chaos, movie was a gigantic hit, top earner of 1961, and won an Oscar for special effects, though honestly, some effects today look pretty rough. Its imprint's recognizable on everything from the James Bond movies to Star Wars to Indiana Jones. That's impressive, but more so is that Guns remains as entertaining as any one of them, and more thrilling than most. There's this old idea that you can't really make an anti-war film because war itself is too thrilling, but nobody who's ever watched L.M. Klimov's Come and See would ever say that. This film hits you like almost nothing else. It shows war realistically, but there's also something surreal and nightmarish about it. You follow this 12-year-old kid who gets a rifle and joins a partisan group fighting Nazis. The things he witnesses there absolutely break him apart. One of my viewers put it like this: Come and See is devastating. In my top 3 all-time movies. I recommended it to and watched it with my son, and we sat silent at the end. Unbelievably good. Horrific? Yes, but a must-see. This isn't a war movie about battles. It's about Nazi atrocities against ordinary people, not specifically targeting Jewish populations here, but rather focusing on what the Nazis did to native Soviet civilians, men, women, kids, anyone living under communist rule. And what you're seeing isn't even exaggerated. The final title card literally says, "The Nazis burned down 628 villages together with all the people in them." One of my commenters nailed it perfectly, saying, not only is Come and See one of the best war films ever produced, it's also one of the best horror films too. All the monsters are human. Don't watch Kelly's Heroes expecting a history lesson. This one's basically a World War II heist movie, with Clint Eastwood leading a bunch of soldiers trying to steal Nazi gold from behind enemy lines. Pretty nuts, but somehow it totally works as entertainment. Eastwood's team includes Telly Savalas and Donald Sutherland, both from The Dirty Dozen. They did get one thing historically right: the tanks. The film was mostly shot in Yugoslavia because their army still had plenty of real Sherman tanks from the war, so those look legit. Eastwood himself, though, wasn't too happy with the finished film. MGM heavily recut it, removing a lot of scenes he said really gave the characters depth and made the story way better. He talked openly in interviews about how disappointed he was that so much got left on the cutting room floor. Steven Spielberg has made a ton of famous movies, but one of his best and most underrated is Empire of the Sun. Even Mel Gibson called it phenomenal and said, "The thing that bothered me about that was it seemed like nobody noticed, but it was this masterpiece." It's based on J.G. Ballard's semi-autobiographical novel set during World War II, with a very young Christian Bale playing an English boy trying to survive the Japanese occupation of China. It's honestly heartbreaking at times. So much so, one of my viewers said, I saw a 6'4", 260-pound bodybuilder and bar bouncer cry at the end of this movie. Critics were kind of split. Some loved it, others criticized Spielberg for Asian erasure, saying there weren't enough prominent Chinese characters. But the British press called it Spielberg's graduation to grown-up filmmaking. And the movie got 6 Oscar nominations, although it lost all of them to The Last Emperor, another film set in China around the same time. If you're looking for historical accuracy, Tora is probably the closest thing Hollywood's ever gotten to a documentary about Pearl Harbor, just way more dramatic. They even had one American director and 2 Japanese directors working together to show both sides clearly. One of my commenters put it perfectly. This gem shows the lead up to Pearl Harbor from both the Japanese, directed by a Japanese director and tech consultants, perspective, and the U.S. perspective. They tried extremely hard to keep things historically precise. Technical advisors on set were actually involved in the real Pearl Harbor attacks. No big-name stars, just solid character actors like Jason Robards and Joseph Cotten to keep things feeling realistic. But despite their best efforts, some mistakes slipped through. For example, the Japanese Zeros weren't actually Zeros, just repainted training planes. Plus, all the Japanese aircraft mistakenly had markings from only one carrier, the Akira, even though historically there were 5 other carriers involved. Like another viewer said, Tora is nearly a documentary about the attack on Pearl Harbor, but dramatic all the same. Billy Wilder knew the horrors of World War II firsthand. Jewish himself, he fled Nazi Germany for America. He lost his mother, grandmother, and stepfather at Auschwitz. So you'd think he'd make nothing but grim war movies, right? But Stalag 17 is actually a comedy drama about American prisoners stuck in a German camp, trying to figure out who among them is secretly informing the Nazis. This isn't the usual prisoners of war film, because unlike concentration camps, camps for Americans weren't nearly as horrific, though Russian prisoners were often treated terribly or killed outright. Mostly, the Americans dealt with endless boredom. But here, the monotony breaks because there's clearly a snitch tipping off the camp commander about escape attempts and sabotage. Wilder turns it into a sharp comedy mystery. Still funny today, despite the setting. It's amazing Wilder pulled off something humorous and suspenseful from his own awful experiences during the war. It just shows how brilliant he was as a director. This is the movie about Hitler's final days inside his bunker, watching as everything around him completely collapses. It's based on the memoir by Hitler's personal secretary, and actually uses some real documentary footage of her too. Historian Ian Kershaw, probably the world's top Hitler expert, wrote some of the best biographies on him, watched this movie and said clearly, "As a production, it is a triumph, a marvelous historical drama." He especially loved how realistically it captured life inside that bunker. But it also stirred controversy, especially in Germany, because it showed Hitler in a very human way. Bruno Ganz, who plays Hitler, is incredible. One of those performances you just never forget. As Kershaw himself put it after watching, "I could not imagine how a film of Hitler's last days could possibly be better done." And one of my commenters summed it up perfectly. Downfall towers over some of those Hollywood stories. Can't argue with that. Probably the greatest submarine film ever made. It follows the crew of a German submarine, the U-96, on their mission. It's not based on any specific historical event, but the filmmakers went completely nuts on accuracy anyway. They built a perfect scale model of a real German U-boat, down to the smallest detail. Director Wolfgang Petersen insisted every screw was authentic. The actors were put through hardcore submariner training and couldn't even go outside into the sun during filming, just to get that pale, exhausted look real submariners had. And Petersen brought in real veterans, like Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, actual captain of the real U-96, as consultants. One commenter put it like this: "Das Boot is the greatest naval war film ever made, but it must be seen in German. It adds immensely to the movie." Jude Law and Ed Harris face off as rival snipers, one Russian, one German, during the Battle of Stalingrad. If you're looking for historical accuracy, this is definitely not your movie. But if you just want a gritty, exciting sniper thriller, this definitely works. There's a lot of historically inaccurate dramatized stuff here, like the movie portrays Vasily Zaitsev, the Russian sniper played by Jude Law, as some backwoods simpleton who just happens to be great with a rifle. In reality, Zaitsev was actually pretty educated. He'd worked as an accountant for 5 years in the Russian Navy before even getting to Stalingrad. But as entertainment, it's good stuff. Impressive CGI for the time, amazing sets, solid acting. Just remember, it's Hollywood, so expect a totally unnecessary romance and everyone speaking English with bad Russian and German accents. Probably the definitive World War II biopic, General George Patton, played brilliantly by George C. Scott. You probably know it for the iconic opening speech, Patton standing in front of a huge American flag. Military historian Carlo D. Este confirmed the speech was basically exactly what the real Patton regularly gave to his new recruits. Only a few lines have been omitted in the scene due to time constraints. Scott's acting saved the whole movie. When it finally released in 1970, it made over $61 million and became iconic. Patton's own family loved it, even though critics were split. Some praised it, others hated it, thought it glorified war. One of my commenters said exactly what most of us were thinking. This was not a movie based on a real story. It was a real story. Well, about as true to life as Hollywood gets. This one's a massive World War II epic directed by Richard Attenborough, all about the Allies' failed Operation Market Garden in Nazi-occupied Netherlands, based on historian Cornelius Ryan's book. The movie was packed with stars: Sean Connery, Robert Redford, Michael Caine, tons of big names. Critics were harsh when it came out. Roger Ebert even called it the longest B-grade war movie ever made. But the movie's reputation actually improved a lot over time. Sure, it's probably half an hour too long, but you have to respect how incredibly realistic and impressive the battle scenes were. Zero CGI, all real. That scene with 35,000 parachutists dropping into Holland, Redford's river crossing under fire, all actually staged with thousands of extras, tons of real equipment, meticulous planning. Pretty incredible when you realize it was all practical.